Okay, before we get going into this next round, I want to point out that everybody's hexagon shape is going to be a different size depending on how big they made their circles in here. If your circles were bigger, then your hexagon is going to be larger. So if you see the diamond shape poking out of yours more or less than what you see on mine, that is normal. Don't worry about it. We'll just work with it. So let's go ahead with that being said and work on our next row. The wiggle wave ruler is what we're going to be using to do this next section. And I want to point out a couple of things on the ruler. So we've got our needle stop line here, and that we will use when we're needing to line things up. If the ruler's not long enough and we need to shift it over, that's a good way that we can use it. We can also use the line that goes up to the high point of the wave and use that to line things up as well. Okay, you'll also notice we've got an echo line here, which can be used if you're wanting to do 1/4 inch echoes of these waves. And you'll notice that I've got my Handi grip already put on. So let's go ahead and move the machine into position. I do want to make a note that the waves, you're wanting to have the high point of the wave in the corner, not the low point. So I will tell you, I've already stitched this out and I started at the low point and then I had to unpick it all. So learn from my lessons and don't do that, or learn from my mistakes, sorry. So we're wanting to use the high point to start. So I am going to want to also start on this side of the red line, and I want it to be about 1/4 inch from the previous seam line. I'm going to use this 1/4 inch dotted line. If you can see on your ruler, that is what I'm going to have lined up on my straight line. Oh, look, you can even see I forgot to pick out part of my wave. We'll have to do that later. Okay, so now with that lined up, I'm going to just shift it a little bit so that I am on with the red line. So my machine needs to be over a little bit, so I need to shift my ruler. And this will probably make a little bit more sense when you're actually stitching it out. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my bobbin. Put my machine back in place. Okay, I'm just testing again, making sure my ruler is still lined up. It's lined up right on the stitch line going all the way across, lined up with the high point of the wave. And I'm again going to have to stop when I get to my diamond shape here and go around it. So for those of you that were lucky and you didn't make your hexagon too small, you might not have to deal with that. Okay, let's bring back the wiggle wave again. So again, I'm lining it up with that 1/4 inch dashed line, trying to make sure I'm even in there. And you'll notice I didn't come all the way down on the diamond because I knew I was going to be coming up and over, and if I'd gone all the way to the bottom of the diamond, I wouldn't have had space for it. Okay, so I'm lined back up, and I am going to go ahead and start stitching until I get to my needle stop position. So right there, I'm lined up with my needle stop. I'm going to take the ruler and I'm going to shift it over. Okay, now you'll notice that I'm going to be a little bit short of making it right to that corner. So I'm going to do a little bit of wiggling with the wiggle wave to get it over. So I'm going to take a couple of stitches here just to lengthen it out a little bit, and then as I come up, I'm going to just every once in a while just maneuver it just one little hair until I get up there and I'm lined up now with that center point there. So depending on the size of your your hexagon, you may need to lengthen or shorten your stitches a little bit just by taking an extra couple stitches at the top and the bottom of each one of those wiggles. So let's go ahead and continue moving around. So I finished the top half of the shape, and I'm going to go ahead and advance my fabric and do the bottom half. Okay, we finished one wiggle around, and now we're going to echo that. So I'm going to bring my foot up to my line and then just line up with my previous stitching. Drop my needle, pull up that bobbin. And rather than advancing my fabric again, I'm just going to work in the reverse of what I just did. So I didn't do a very good job of getting my waves lengthened out enough, and I kind of had to fudge it a little bit here at the end. So I'm going to have to do kind of the same thing going backwards, just to try to echo around. I'm going to just do a few stitches until I can get my ruler lined up with my previous stitch line, and I'll have to continue to adjust that as I go around because I did have to lengthen the wiggle a little bit. So now I'm looking like it's pretty close. And I still haven't cleared the diamond. Oops. I'm actually going to stop here at this low point so I can do a little bit better shifting job if I need to. Looks like it's gonna line up pretty good. Get my point there. I have to say this is probably the part of this whole cloth that I've had to unpick the most. So hopefully you guys will benefit from all of my mistakes and learn. Okay, so you can see I'm lined, well you probably can't see, but it's lined up on the back, but it's not lining up with my stitch lines. So again, same thing as I'm going around, I'm gonna just shift just a little bit until I get lined up with my previous stitch row. So can you see those little tiny movements? That's how I lengthened it to fit into the space I had. Getting quite the thread build up there. If you don't want the thread build up, you always have the option to do a tie off. So for the next step that we're going to do, we're just going to do some more wiggles, and there's not a specific amount of distance that you need to use, so just pick whatever works for you. I did notice that things were not staying perfectly even throughout mine. Some sides are getting a little bit longer than others, so I went ahead and measured from my center out to all of my points, and this is a 12-inch ruler here, and I took a chalk mark and made a mark on there, and then same thing here, making a 12-inch just on those 6 sides, and then I'm taking the 12-inch ruler, going back, and I'm going to connect those lines, and I'm just using a chalk pencil. You can use Taylor's chalk, you can use whatever marking utensil works for you. But now I can use that as a guideline for the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and mark these other sides. And hopefully that will help me to keep things even. Okay, so that's marked. And now we are going to do the same thing we did earlier with the wiggle wave. Again, starting at the high point, working across. This time what I want to do is, since I'm starting on a high point, I want to make sure that my middle point is on a high also. So I can shift as I'm going throughout this section, and then again throughout this section to kind of even things out. So I'm not getting to my very last point and trying to shift a whole bunch. So that's a little bit of a tip there for you. So let's go ahead and stitch out this side. So I'm 1/4 of an inch away from that line that I drew. And I'm just barely off with my center point on this side, so I'm only going to have to shift it just a tiny bit as I'm going throughout this. And I'm actually going to shift at that high point. Excellent. Okay, shifting over again, matching the high point, and then 1/4 of an inch down from the next line. Great, let's keep going. Okay, I'm gonna move the machine just up 1/4 of an inch and get it lined up with my red line. Gonna line up with my previous stitch line lined up with the edge of the ruler. Create my 1/4 inch echo. Oops. Okay, when you have oops like that where you don't stay on the ruler, for something like this, I'm just gonna go back, do another little tie off, fix the error, and then I can go back later and unpick the part that had the little boo-boo on it. Okay, I will admit that part was a little bit trickier. I did a lot of unpicking. I think that the second round went a lot smoother for me. So hopefully, like I said earlier, you guys can learn from all of my mistakes and you won't have to go through that hassle. One thing that I do want to point out is that we've got all this chalk mark on the quilt, so you can just take a lint brush and just rub it over there, and that will take away your chalk marks. So we are done with part 5. Join me next time as we fill in these center parts with some flying geese using our 1/2 carat diamond template. We'll see you next time.